All right, welcome back to Awaken Atlanta. I am Tim Rey with Shannon McVey.
Good morning.
And we have a very, very, very
intellectual man.
Brilliant man, Thomas Campbell. He's a physicist and an author of My Big Toe, which is and many other books. Thomas, welcome.
Glad to be here.
What nice
Tim?
Background there. I just love where that is. I got the green screen. Is that really
that's that's my front yard.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that's fantastic.
But it is a green screen. It's a photograph I took.
I love it.
So we've been talking the all morning in reference to us living simulations and many different theories, and we use the analogy of the video games. And I interviewed Riz Verk, and the double split experiment. And Riz Verk said that there's a 50 to 99% chance that we are living in a simulation. And what's your take on that?
Well, I would raise that to be a bit higher than that. Speaking as a physicist, probably a very large minority of physicists these days will tell you that our reality is information-based. That's the way they will say that. And their science has told them that. It used to be that we thought of an electron, say, as an example, as a little chunk of mass with a charge.
Right.
But we don't think of it that way anymore. We think of it as a point with the attributes of mass and charge. And the reason we do that is that if we think of it as a chunk of mass with a charge, we can't get the right answer. And by that, I mean, when we look at those atom smashers and look at all the particles that come out the other side, we get the wrong answer. But if we think of it as a point with the attributes of mass and charge, then we can get the right answer. So that leads physicists to say that our reality is information-based. Now, scientists, physicists particularly, are kind of conservative when it comes to what they say about reality. And saying that it is information-based is the same as saying that it can be computed. Okay. Those are equivalent ideas. If it's information-based, then it can be computed. An information system can compute that information. And saying that it can be computed is saying that it could be a simulation. Saying that can be a simulation is the same as calling it a virtual reality. Mm-hmm. So the scientists don't like to say the word virtual reality because when you say that, it brings out other questions. Oh, if it's a virtual reality, then where's the computer?
Yeah. Right.
Who's the programmer?
Which I'd like to know. Do you have any answers about that?
Oh, yeah, I can give you answers about that. But in any case, because of that, the scientists don't have an answer for those questions.
Yeah.
All they know is that reality appears to be information-based, so it appears to be a virtual reality.
But isn't it more organic, a virtual reality, than what we see like in Minecraft and these other computer games? Isn't it more of a free-flowing kind of, organic, more free will involved in it, or is it all just laid out for us?
Well, let's look at that. Let's take a virtual reality like The Sims. I'm an old guy, so I talk about Sims and World of Warcraft and No Man's Sky and things like that are probably all old hat now.
World of Warcraft, Tom?
Yeah, my son played that every day for years.
Right.
Yeah,
my son does too. His name's Tom as well.
One of my favorite RPGs for sure.
Really?
All right, so keep going.
Okay, so if we look at a game like that, so let's just look at World of Warcraft. What's the structure of that game? Well, the elves and the barbarians and all of that, they don't really exist, right? That's just information. So the virtual reality is created by a computer, it's computed, and it's an information-based reality. But the players make all the choices for the avatars, right? The player is the avatar's consciousness. It makes all the choices. The player doesn't do anything. It just stands there and wobbles unless there's a player that makes its choices for us. So the players are the consciousness. Now, if you think of the viewpoint from, say, the elf that's in that virtual reality, the computer that computes that virtual reality has to be non-physical to that elf. Okay, for that elf, what's physical is that virtual reality that it lives in. And the computer can't be inside the virtual reality. It has to be outside the virtual reality.
Correct.
Okay, so the computer is non-physical to the elf. The player that makes all the choices also has to be non-physical to the elf, because the player and the computer are just basically talking to each other. That's the whole game, right? There is really no reality where elves run around and fight barbarians. That doesn't really exist. It's all in the minds of the players. In other words, if there's no players logged on, that computer computes nothing.
Nothing.
It's not doing anything. So a player logs on, now that computer sends a data stream to that player, and another player logs on, sends a data stream to that player. So the actual game...
That's just like co-creating. That's just your thoughts creating your reality.
Well, there's an element of that, and I can explain some of that, but let me finish this model. If what we have now is the player and the consciousness is non-physical to the inside the virtual reality, okay? And we have the player and the computer having to talk to each other, so they have to be in the same reality.
Okay.
You don't communicate across reality frames. You have to be within the same reality to communicate. All right, so if that's the way virtual realities work, then look at our virtual reality here, this information-based reality. Then our bodies are the avatars, okay? There is consciousness that is the player making all of our choices, all right? And the computer is also part of this consciousness system, because the player and the computer all have to be, sort of in the same reality, made of the same stuff, if you like,
Right.
So that then creates this idea that we live in this virtual reality. There is the source of the virtual reality is what I call the larger consciousness system. It's consciousness as an information system. And that makes sense because, what are you conscious of? Well, what you are conscious of is what your five senses measures, what your five senses sees, right? And what is that? That's information. That's all just information. The light hits your retina, and the retina puts a little electrical signal and goes down and shifts some neurons around. So all of that is just information.
Right.
And that then is not such a big jump to say that there is this information system, which I call consciousness. That's the fundamental thing. That's really what's fundamental. And everything else is virtual.
Wow.
And a piece of that consciousness system is configured as the computer, because consciousness is an information system. A piece of that consciousness is configured as the player that's playing.
Okay.
So you get that kind of model. So that's kind of the basis of this being a virtual reality. So it's very different than most ideas of virtual reality. What you read from Burke was a lot different than that. My concept of virtual reality is based on consciousness being the computer, consciousness being the player.
See, I get with you now. I'm with you. That's kind of more along the lines as I think. Whereas like people are bringing in alternate universes, you don't think that's even a thing.
Yeah.
No, I don't think that's a thing. It's very inefficient.
Okay.
When you have, it's called many worlds theory, and there are some physicists who espouse that, but that's because physicists tend to be trapped in their ideology of this being a materialist-based world. And that's kind of the old idea. And that actually was Newton's idea, the big clockwork universe where
There's
it's just
again.
Yeah, I think you're onto something, Shannon.
where it's just a big machine, you see. That's the idea. But quantum physics has kind of trashed that idea for the last 100 years.
What do you think about quantum physics?
Well, quantum physics is a real thing.
Yeah.
And
But isn't that alternate universes? Or am I not understanding it?
That's not alternate universes. What happens is quantum physics has a aspect to it that's called non-local, which means looking at it as a material process just doesn't work. it's not a material process. It's a statistical, it's a probabilistic process. Our reality is based on information and probability. That's what quantum physics tells us.
Okay.
Well, because we have these non-local things, materialists who make up the kind of the majority of physicists are at a quandary of how to describe this, how to work that into their model. So they've come up with this very, I'd say, off-the-wall idea that every time we do something, every time we make a choice, it spins off another entire physical universe. It's called the multiverse.
Okay.
Probabilities.
And that multiverse, then there's every action. If an electron goes from a spin up to a spin down, we need another universe. So then their idea is that everything that can possibly happen does happen in some alternative universe, you see.
Okay, right.
So, but if you think of if I scratch my head with this hand instead of that hand, another whole universe has to be computed.
Yeah,
you see,
that's
electron
crazy.
flips, another universe has to be, and all of those new universes also, as things change within them.
Within change, yeah.
With it, a new universe has to be created. So every new universe is spawning, quadrillions of universes, per microsecond, and
It's infinite. You can't even measure it.
It doesn't work. It's just not a very good idea, but it's the only idea they could come up with to explain this non-locality. And they say that, well, what happens is we're just skipping from one of these universes to another, and that's how our reality is done. I don't think any of that's a very good idea. It's non-workable, non-plausible.
So listen, I hear you, and I question it. I mean, now we talk about multi-dimensions beyond this reality. When your five senses expands, that could be something different. It's expansion in the same dimension of reality, just we're limited bandwidth here. But can we talk a little bit about, Thomas, that the spirituality aspect of the Avatar, like in the movie, was it the Avatar?
Avatar.
The movie? Avatar. That how the blue people were the computerized versions, right? And then let's just say that the humans, I guess at the time, were the spiritual beings potentially managing or using the computers in that reality. So how do you describe that? Because you worked in the Monroe Institute, and you're understanding life beyond this limited bandwidth of reality with your out-of-body experiences and the training and all that. So how does spirituality work in with this simulation that supposedly we live in? How does it even interact? And this is where I think a lot of people are, because they believe, they know there's a sense of a higher power, a God, there's something collective, whatever it is, but they can't define it any more than that. And then you have people speaking about these, these simulations in the virtual reality. It's almost like they keep them separate rather than combining it. And what's your take on that?
Well, it's all combined.
Okay.
It is all one. It's all one thing. You see, take this larger consciousness system that I talk about, which is just a metaphor for the source. The source is information, therefore it's an information system, and that suits consciousness because that's what consciousness is information. What are you conscious of? Well, that's described with information. So if you take that system as source, okay, then what are we? We are subsets of that system. We're pieces of consciousness. So that system just kind of makes a little partition out of its own self and calls that an individuated unit of consciousness. It has free will, and it can interact with other individuated units of conscious free will. But we're all part of that same larger consciousness system, but we interact with each other. So if there's enough of us, then we make a social system. And a social system lowers its entropy, evolves, and now I've just jumped into another idea here. But we'll have to look at a consciousness system. Okay, is an information system. Information systems evolve by creating information. If you have a system, it's all just random bits. There is no information. You order those bits, that creates some information. You give that ordering of the bits some some value, some meaning. It's a metaphor for something. It's a symbol. See, now you have meaning. So information systems lower their entropy, and entropy is a word that's a measure of disorder. So when you increase entropy, there's more disorder. So we start with a high entropy system that's all random bits. Information develops, that lowers the entropy of the system because now we have more order. So how an information system evolves is it evolves by lowering its entropy, creating more information, more value, more content,
order. Yeah.
more meaning. Yeah, so that's the way it orders.
Get some water if you need it,
No. Well, I hate to do that over my mic here, but anyway. So if you have a social system, which is bunches of pieces of these little individuated units of consciousness that all belong to the one thing, the optimal way for the social system to arrange itself is through cooperation. Cooperation comes through caring, working together. So that's how consciousness evolves. It moves from chaos, as you say, toward more cooperation, more caring, more working together. It can build more things by cooperating than it can by, not cooperating.
So lowering entropy, it's a natural occurrence when there is cooperation, love, compassion, people interacting with each other. But but take it to the spiritual level. So as our souls, let's just say souls, are occupying these bodies, these avatars, okay? So we're here. So somehow in this, our souls are assisting in the lowering of the entropy.
Yeah. Okay. So let's pull that all together, as you say. So we have this larger consciousness system. That's the source. If you like, you can call that God, but it's not perfect. It's not always been there. It is evolving. So it's an evolving system. It's not supernatural. It's a natural thing. It's just consciousness, and it's evolving by lowering its entropy. We're pieces of it, and we are trying to lower our own entropy. That means we are trying to become more cooperative, caring, compassionate, and so on. All right. So now that all seems to make sense. You see, it's not that the soul is inside the body. The body's just a virtual body. Okay. The individuated unit of consciousness is the soul. That's the player. You see, it's the player. So it's not that it lives inside your body. It's that your body's virtual, but consciousness, a piece of consciousness, an individuated unit of consciousness is the player. Mm-hmm. So the player is the soul. It's the active thing. It's the living. It's the choice maker. So you see, that brings in the spiritual element. So we have source, we have individuals, but the individuals are all part of one thing. So we have the point of it. The purpose of it all is to become more cooperative, to care about each other, to help each other out. That's our purpose. And we, as pieces of that system, as we lower our own individual entropy, the system entropy is also lowered because we're a part of the system.
Self-help.
Yeah, we're a part of the system, you see. So then that kind of gives you in a nutshell, the nature of what's going on and Go ahead.
So what do you think happens? Like, I have so many freaking questions. I've been writing them down. I just want to let it out. But what do you think happens if that's the case? So you don't think there's a puppet master, basically, that's already wrote our program for us? We have free will. We're all here to just evolve to be better people, basically. So where does our energy go when we pass?
Well, if you'd like to know what happens when we pass, then we are consciousness. We're not a physical body. We're playing a virtual character in a virtual reality, just like the elf. What happens when your elf dies? Well, you run back to the graveyard, get your elf and go back, pick up all your stuff, and you get back in the game again. That's what happens when your elf dies. And if you're playing Sims and your character dies, well, you get another character. Well, why do you do that? Because if you only had one chance, and that is until your character died, and then you're banned from the game and you never get back in it, well, it wouldn't be a very fun game, right? Because there's a whole lot to learn. There's a whole lot to learn in that game. It takes you, hours and hours and hours and hundreds of dead characters before you actually start to know how to win the game.
Right.
Well, that's the same here. The game is growing up, becoming caring, becoming cooperative. That's the game. And obviously we're not very good at that yet. All you have to do is look at the world out there. So we need a lot of effort. So here you are, your character that you're playing dies, but your consciousness, so you're immortal. You don't die. What you do is you get another character, because what you're trying to do here is grow up and become love, become caring.
And then what happens when you figure that out?
Well, you have a long way to go. Figuring that out, that lowering that entropy goes on and goes on and goes on. There's no end point to it.
Well, sounds like we're raising our entropy at this point in the world, at least from the surface level. However, I find this fascinating what you're saying, because how important is to know that we're living in a simulation? I mean, it seems like what's the benefit? What has the benefit been to you, Thomas, to know that we are living you figured it out, we're living in a simulation? How does it benefit people to understand that, if it does at all, or we just got to give compassion? It doesn't really matter what we actually are structured to be living in.
Yeah, no. It doesn't really matter that much, overall. What matters is that you understand that your point of your being here is to evolve the quality of your consciousness, to, again, be cooperative, be helpful, be caring, work together. That is important to know that works. The other thing that was important, that when I take this model of consciousness, I can also take the same concepts, the same ideas that we've just been talking about, and I can derive much better physics. I can explain why the double slit experiment acts the way it is. And quantum mechanics is not a weird science. It's a logical science, just like all the other sciences. And all of those paradoxes in physics, like, where did that ball of plasma come from that started the Big Bang? Because that obviously didn't come from here, because here it didn't exist yet. And where does mass come from? And where does time come from?
Gravity.
And where does charge and gravity?
To me. This sounds depressing. I don't like this. I don't want to agree with that. I don't, because you just that's Groundhog Day. You keep having to come back to Earth and relive and relive and relive, and there is no happy ending.
Oh, there is a happy ending. And that is that if you do increase your consciousness quality, okay, you do evolve, then what you find is that your life is very pleasant. It's happy. All your relationships are terrific. Life is good. And even when you live in a place that's full of the chaos, dysfunction and chaos that we have now, you still can be smiling. You're still a happy person because you understand what's going on. You see the bigger picture. So the more you evolve, the better things get. The happier you get, life gets wonderful, you see. And then you move from the position of just wanting to be happier to the position of wanting to help. Now you come here in order to be part of the solution, in order to help other people grow up.
It makes so much sense. So Thomas, you see God more as a collective than you do as an individual.
Yes, and I was in Atlanta about 3 or 4 years ago and giving a talk at Unity North, I think it was called. Yep. And I gave a talk there, and there were a couple of people with theological degrees that were who ran that church. Yep. And I asked them, I said, tell me, what are the attributes of God? How would you describe God? No dogma, just the attributes of God. And they thought about it. They caucused and talked, and they came up with a list of about 5 or 6 things. And every one of the things they came up with was an attribute of the larger consciousness system.
Like what? Like
grace, love, mercy.
Yeah, all those kinds of things. That is the source, right? Mm-hmm. The source that is aware, the source that is helpful to us in our own growing up. Yeah. Love, caring, mercy, all those things. Well, those attributes then are the attributes of the larger consciousness system. So you can make that. But the larger conscious system, like I say, it's not perfect. It's not been there forever. It had to evolve itself and become that way. It didn't just start that way. It's still evolving as we are. Evolution is open-ended. Evolution doesn't just say, well, we're done. You just keep evolving as long as there are new states to evolve into, new configurations.
Do you believe that there are like black holes that you can go back in time or be stuck in a time loop or anything like that?
Where's that coming from?
No, it doesn't work like that. Of course, there are black holes, but black hole is not a time machine.
Like a wormhole.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that. Now, you can move forward and backward in time with your mind. You can visit the past, but the past is
memories.
Done. Yeah, you don't. Well, it's not just memories, but a lot of information is stored within this consciousness system. In order to render this virtual reality, it has to have some databases that keeps the information it needs to do the rendering. And those databases are available to you as consciousness. You can explore this consciousness system because you're not a body, you're a consciousness.
Right. So you don't think there's another realm, and then I'm done.
Okay.
You don't think that there's another realm?
Other dimensions, she's saying.
Yeah.
Other dimensions.
Oh, yes, there are lots of others in the sense that this virtual reality is just one of many. There's lots of virtual realities. When you die, you end up in a different virtual reality. Okay, there are other virtual realities much like this one with a rule set like ours. Virtual realities basically evolve.
Some are
They're
more
not
denser
programmed.
than others.
See, don't you think there has to be a creator of all that?
Well, this larger consciousness system is the source.
Okay.
It wants to lower its entropy, and we are part of its strategy for lowering its entropy, is we lower our entropy individually. And for that, we need a place that has consequences, a place where our choices are meaningful. Well, that's why it created this virtual reality. This is an entropy reduction trainer for individuated units of consciousness. You see, just like a flight trainer, right? So that's the big concept. But the neat thing is it not only explains metaphysics, philosophy, theology, but it also explains quantum physics. Yeah. And I've got a paper that I published, peer-reviewed journal in quantum physics, and I have some experiments that will help justify these ideas. What I'm telling you are basically just concepts at this point. It's a model.
Tell us about the paper.
It's just a model.
Tell us about the paper and what you've been up to, your latest book, and things that are going on right now in your life, because you're one of the most fascinating men I ever met. And I just really appreciate the work that you've given humanity over the decades. And thank God, Thomas, that you're out there and you're sharing this information, because you really bring that level of spiritual unconditional love in with the coldness of science, So I just love the blend.
Well, I kind of had two careers, and I started them both at about the same time. So I'm a physicist, and I've worked as a physicist, professional physicist all my life. I'm retired now, but I put about 35, 40 years into physics. And at the same time, I was a consciousness researcher, because right after I got out of graduate school, I met Bob Monroe, and he had a lab for studying consciousness. So that started a career of studying consciousness right about the same time I started a career as a physicist. And I've been working on both of them now for, 50 years. And I find out that what I did is I took all the facts that I knew about consciousness, and I got those from just being able to do out of body myself. That's what Bob taught me. How can you get around in this other reality that interacts with this reality? Well, it took me about 2 years before I actually, came to the conclusion that it was real and wasn't some sort of mind game or mind trick or imagination. But eventually you get to the point that your own experience tells you that this is a real thing. Well, then my job was to figure out, how does it work? What can you do? What can't you do? Why? Why does it work sometimes and not other times? And so I had to work all that out. And when I did, I came up with a set of facts of consciousness. And then I wrote these books, My Big Toe, which basically was a model of consciousness. But I knew that consciousness was fundamental. You see, consciousness is more fundamental than this world, because I could do things within the consciousness realm that would affect things here in the physical realm. But I couldn't do the other. Anything you do in the physical realm doesn't change things in the consciousness realm. So that means that consciousness was fundamental. The arrow of causality moves from consciousness to the physical world. So that tells you that, the physical world's a subset and the consciousness is the superset. So I took those kinds of facts about consciousness, and I'm a physicist, so I've had a lot of facts about the physical world as well. And I wanted to make a theory that put all those facts together under just one understanding. That was the theory of everything, everything objective and everything subjective, not just everything objective.
Yeah. TOE.
Yeah. So that's the TOE. So that's the actual theory of all things objective and subjective. And that's kind of where I went. And then as I saw that it gave me an opportunity to derive physics more accurately and explain the things in physics that weren't explained, that are paradoxes, then I wrote some physics experiments. I made some physics experiments up that if these experiments work the way I think they'll work, and they are being worked out now at Cal Poly in Pomona, California. There's a professor out there who's been working on them for about a year, and hopefully in the next 3 or 4 months, 6 months, we'll have them done. We'll have results from them. But they offer some very strong evidence, and we talk about evidence in science, not proof. Proof is for whiskey and for mathematics, but evidence is for physics and science. So it'll make some strong evidence that this is indeed a virtual reality and that consciousness is the computer.
That's fascinating.
Okay.
What brilliant work. I do have one last question.
I feel like it's way more realistic what you were saying compared to our first guests and people that came before. It's more woo-woo. What you're saying feels more scientific.
And speaking of our first guest, Mark, and I know I talked about the flat Earth in the past, but I don't want to get into that now because he was a flat earther. But he did bring up one question, and I wanted to hear from your perspective, from a scientific perspective. He said there are no circles in computer programming; they're just like digital squares. And if there's and his point was, if there are no circles actually when you're programming it, he's saying that there's no curvature formula for the roundness of the Earth. But is there, number one, I guess is true, is there no circles in computer programming?
Kind of yes and no. Okay. He has a point in that when you work with a digital background, right, everything is an approximation. So a circle, by definition, is this smooth curve.
Right.
Well, you approximate that digitally by almost a circle, but it's got a bunch of tiny little facets in it because you have, circle, right? Well, it's not squares. It's just that you make the circle and it really has a lot of facets. In other words, a lot of little straight lines. But if you make those little straight lines so small, it looks exactly like a circle. And how small do you get to make them? Does each little straight line like 10 to the minus, 35 meters or something? That's the Planck length. Well, in all purposes, that is a circle. But what he's saying is it's not the perfect circle. There's always some errors there. But that's just the way digital computing is, because it has pixels. You can't... Right. It doesn't have anything between pixels. You have to go from this pixel to the next pixel.
Right.
It's like resolution on your camera. If you go in enough detail, then your picture will fall apart into pixels and it doesn't look very good anymore. Well, that's the way a computed world is. But you can't then take that and make some general theoretical observation about the world. That's just a big, that's a big leap that doesn't really, doesn't really have much logic behind it.
Gotcha.
Okay. So the computed world is one that has pixels. And matter of fact, that is why the speed of light is a constant. Because you move 1 pixel of distance for 1 pixel of time, and that's as fast as you can move through any virtual reality. Every virtual reality has a speed limit. 1 pixel of distance for 1 pixel of time. So see, that's one of the big mysteries of why is the speed of light a constant.
Right.
Wow.
It's a constant because this is a virtual reality. That's what's an attribute of a virtual reality is the
brilliant.
fastest thing as a constant.
Just brilliant.
So,
I'm going to have to go back and watch this
We
show.
are. And I'll tell you what, Thomas, thank you so much. If you guys want to know
Yes.
anything about, you want to know everything about this world and why we are here, go get My Big Toe and keep track of Thomas, too. You can catch him everywhere on YouTube, Facebook, and your email you want to share, too, or website, Thomas?
I have a lot of videos out there. I've got about 1,000 hours of video. Every time I do a course or something, I put it out for free on YouTube because I have my books are free too. You don't have to buy the books; you can get them free at Google Books.
No kidding.
Yeah. So it's all out there. Lots of information. So if you find any of this interesting, you can go to mybigtoe.com. That'll work. Or you can find me on YouTube, and there's lots of stuff. Just go through it slowly. It's a big thing to get your mind around, but it is actually science, and it is actually logical. It has no assumptions in it that are remarkable.
Spirituality is logical. That's good to know.
Yes.
Thomas, thank you so much, guys. And I think we're going to go right into our recap here. But again, check Thomas
thank
Campbell out.
you.
He's a phenomenal soul here in these times of increasing entropy. So
I wanted
I'm
to
glad
ask
he's
him
here
what
to
he
help
thought
lower
about
it.
this whole COVID thing. I wanted to know if you thought there was like some sort of agenda happening with everything that's going on with COVID, or if you just think that this is us. I mean, because we're certainly not leveling up right now.
Well,
Good question.
what happens is that the way reality works really for us is that stuff happens and we get to deal with it. That's a summary of life, right? That's the way life is. So the point is not what happens. That's not that important. What is important is how we deal with it. That's where the significance comes in. So if we deal with it with caring, with love, with cooperation, then we're going to level up. We're going to evolve the quality of our consciousness. If we deal with it
with fear,
with self-centeredness, with fear, with negativity, then we're de-evolving. That's more chaotic. So stuff happens. That's the way it is here in this virtual reality, and that's what the virtual reality is here for.
How do you
Stuff
feel about
happens.
cooperating with what the government's saying, Tim Ray?
Well, I don't think he means by cooperating on that level. I think he means cooperating with your soul, with what you giving back and loving people and not condemning people. That's what I think he means.
Yeah. I don't mean cooperating with a government or with any particular thing or institution.
I'm curious. I'm trying to get there.
No, I'm talking about cooperating with each other.
Yes.
With our interactions with other people need to be positive.
Start uniting and stop dividing.
Exactly.
Yes.
You see, that's the right solution. That's the right action.
Yes.
So it happens, and we get to evolve or de-evolve based on our choices.
Amen to that. Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you run for president? So,
I'll vote for you.
so would I. Guys, Thomas Campbell, the one and only. So, guys, you can stay on, Tom, if you want to. Leave on. We're going to close it out here in a couple of minutes here. But
how much time do we have left, Dash?
2 minutes.
1 minute.
What
Okay.
a great show. Do you not love it?